So we talked a little bit about this in class. What our end goal here is to transform this data from a flat structure over to a tree structure or a graph. And so let's touch on that really quick before we move on. I'm just going to jump back over here into Chrome, and I'm going to go back over to our data, and I'm just going to grab a little section of data here. So we'll just copy a few records. And I'm just going to make, we'll just pop open a new window here. So Control Shift P, on Mac users, Command P. There's a little option here, format document. Nope, it's not what I want. I typed the wrong thing every time. Change language mode is what we want. So hit change language mode and type in JSON. You can also just come down here to the bottom right and click that button and click on JSON. So that would have said plain text. When we first loaded this up, you can hit that. But it's always good to use those shortcuts, Command Shift P, and jump straight into the palette there. And so I'm just going to paste in that data I'd copied. And so I don't know if you noticed where I stopped my copy, but clearly I didn't catch the full record there of ID, year, make. So let's just chop that off. So we'll just end on that comma. We'll delete the comma and close that out with a square bracket. And so I've got this array here. And so do I have to save it? Let's see if I can just format this really quick. So Control Shift P. Now we can do that. Format document. And it gives us this nice, pretty layout here. So I'm not going to save the file. We'll just work with it here in memory. But this is an array of records, right? And so again, I'm calling this a flat structure. There is no inherent parent-child relationship. We can, as humans, infer the relationship between different values, looking through here if the years were all the same. And we'll set this up actually. So let's make all these years the same. So 1909. And paste that in. So we'll assume in 1909 there was Ford, Chrysler. Let's have two Chryslers actually, right? So in 1909 we had a 1909 Ford Model T. We had a 1909 Chrysler Imperial, and we had a 1909 Chrysler 2CV. So just kind of make that up. But the point here, what we're looking at, there is records in our data where they're duplicated like this. Right? And they're represented across three different objects. We want to represent that as a tree, as a graph. And when we do that, what I'm fishing for here, what we want to do is turn this around so we're not duplicating all of this data. So what I want to say at this point is that I have an object and it has a year, and it would be 1909. And so let's put close in. Oh, you know what? It's going to complain about this because it doesn't want multiples in the same thing. So all I'm going to do, I'd set that to JSON. Let's just change this to JavaScript. Whatever JavaScript options you have, I'm going to hit Babel JavaScript. That'll just keep it from complaining in the file. But since JSON, you can only have one structure in there. So JavaScript, it's not going to get mad at us. And so I could have year 1909 in here, and it starts in on this same sort of layout. But 1909, even being an integer or a string, that's valid to use that as a key, right? So we can, instead of saying that the year is 1909, we could say that this data is by year. So we could call that variable by year, and then all the keys are years, and the values of a year will be another data structure, another object. And so if we look at this data, there are two makes. And so if we, instead of saying that the make is Chrysler, if we just put this in our data structure by year 1909, that the next key is going to be the make. So we can just drop in here and say Ford, colon, and then whatever Ford's models are. And so we'll just stub that out for now as another object. And then we can see that the next make is Chrysler, right? And then Chrysler is going to have models. So our data organized by year, or we could even be more explicit and say year, make, model. 1909. So this entire data structure, first off, is an object. 1909 is a key. That's the year in here. That's under 1909. The keys then are Ford and Chrysler. And then if you look, Ford, in this case, we have one model, and then we have two models for Chrysler. We don't necessarily need an object for that. For this data set, an array is what's most appropriate. So Ford has one model at this point in time, and it's the Model T. We've kind of made up some data here, but we're pretending that Chrysler existed and had two models in 1909, and so we get rid of this object and make it an array. Oops. So we have an imperial and the 2CV. So just copy and paste those in. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to go terminal, new terminal, and I'm just going to run node. So we're inside here where we can just play around with JavaScript in Node. So I'm just going to paste this in, this let by year, and hit enter. Notice it says undefined because this didn't return anything. We just created a data structure. We can paste in that data structure and we can evaluate it. So there's what our data looks like, right? And this is a tree. So we've turned it from flat records into a tree. So by year, make, model, 1909, Ford, Chrysler. What this gives us the power to do, and I guess it's important to note that 1909 did get converted to a string, so we'll have to keep that in mind as we work with our data. So what we have here, I can paste in by year, make, model, and I can say dot 1909 and hit enter. It's mad about that. So we use the array notation. We'll see if it's keeping it as an integer there. Right, so it did keep it as an integer, so we can't use the dot notation. We have to use the array access notation, those square blocks. But we say by year, make, model, 1909. So we've built this index that lets us go fetch the data by the year very, very quickly, very efficiently. And then if I want to know what the makes are, right, we can see that this is an object. So if I just wanted to know the list of makes, then I can do object.keys. Oops. And so object.keys here, on that object, I can see that Ford and Chrysler were the models in 1909. Now that I know that, I could come in here and I could plug in Ford, right? Or I could say dot, if I put a dot, I could say dot Ford, right? And the keys come back as 0 because that's an array. So if we erase this and look, by year, make, model. Oh wait, why did it do it? Makes a liar out of me every time. By year, make, model, Ford. Yeah, that's correct. Sorry, yeah, it pulls back this array. So the keys would be array indices. And so our other option, we can also access that in array notation, right, as Ford. And we see all of the models that were created. Chrysler. There we go. Right, and so that reads nicely. When we're reading our code, we can go in here and say, okay, there's some value being pulled out by year, make, model, 1909 Chrysler, and there were two models. And so it's easy to reason about what data we're accessing. It makes it a little easier to debug, and it certainly makes it easier for our end goal of our project, which is to build these select boxes where first I pick a year. So that would look like this, right? So when I pick a year, then I'm going to have some options. If I wanted to populate that select box for years, right, then I can just do object.keys by year, make, model, and it's going to give me all of the possible years. So we are building this data structure in such a way that it's going to help us access our data down the road. Now, the fact that it's saying object.keys by year, make, model, and it's returning that as a string, we're going to keep this in mind. We want to clean our data, and we're just going to go ahead and convert a year over to a string as we create our tree data structure. So you kind of get an idea where we're headed. We're going to change those flat rows. I'm going to close that terminal, close this down. We're going to change these flat rows over to this nested hierarchical tree. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to make a new function here, and I'm just going to say it's called make tree. So this function make tree, and it takes in the full data. So I'm just naming that full data to help me keep track as a programmer as I'm building this. What's this function taking? Oh, it takes the full data set, the full data. And so make tree, instead of console.log down here, we're going to call make tree. And make tree is going to get passed JSON, right? Because that's the parameter name here. So we fetch the data URL, we handle the response by pulling the JSON out of the response. That returns a promise. So once that promise resolves, we handle that JSON data that's been parsed by passing it to make tree. And so it's called JSON here because that's the parameter name, but we are renaming that parameter up here for this function full data. And so there's a few options. What we want to do, we know what our data set is. Most of the time, you're going to know what your data set is. And when I say that, I mean what type it is. And so full data is an array. So if I want to loop over full data, I can do full data dot for each, right? And I'm going to call those records. So R for record. So for each record, arrow function, I want to do something with each record. So just something easy right now. Let's do a console.log the current record is R. All right, and I'll save that. And let's go back. We'll pull our terminal back up here. And so look at our directory that we're in, right? That's important. PWD, right? LS. So we are not in vehicle picker. So I'm just going to type in clear. So I'm going to do CD vehicle picker. Now that I'm in here, I can do ls. I can see where I'm at. So I'm going to fire off node utils / data tree transform.js and hit enter. And so we can see, oh, it's mad about something. What do I get mad about? I have a semicolon where I do not need a semicolon. I actually need a closing parentheses. Things got all out of whack here. What am I missing? So dot then JSON, da 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 da, and there's where our semicolon goes. And it was highlighted red. I just ignored that. So our linter was even helping us there. So we'll run that again, right? And we're watching it output. There were 7,000 records in there. They have these IDs, so it tells us the current record is, and we can see this data as an object. So just like we just talked about in our example, I want to group all of this data by year, and I want to return that object from this function. So as you're programming and creating functions, what I recommend doing is go ahead and stub out what you want your return value to be. And so we're going to say let, and this will be by year. So this is this grouped data set by year. Say let by year equal an object. We know we're going to put all of this into an object. And finally, we want to return the data that we've grouped by year. And we can hit save. So now we've stubbed that out. We've avoided the unused variable errors. And let's look at what each record is. So we're looping through each row. We have this record in hand. If I want to group this data by year, notice there's multiple years. Right? Objects cannot have duplicate keys. So if we try to keep putting data in under the same year, we're just going to keep overriding. And so let's demonstrate that. So keep in mind what I'm about to type. This is going to not give us the correct result, but that's okay. So we're going to say by year. And then we're going to plug in the current year that we're on. So we'll just say R dot year, right? So we have this record. It has a key called year. So we're saying by year, R dot year equals R. So all we're doing is plugging that data in under that given key. By year, R dot year, R. Return by year. So before we return this, let's do a console.log and let's log out by year. And so I'm going to get rid of, actually, I'll just comment this out for the time being. So I've saved this file. So remember, there were a ton of items here for 2012, 2013. There's a ton of items in there. So let's run this again. Now look at this. So we only have one 2013. And look at all these saying Volvo XC9 because this data was ordered. It's went through alphabetical order because of the way the array was structured was alphabetical. So only one wins. The very last one that we plugged in is what got saved here. So if we want to fix this, before we just shove data in under a key, we need to look and see if it already exists. So that's the first little challenge that we're going to tackle here. And so we're going to say, let year data equal by year r.year. Right? So the first thing I'm doing here, I'm saying go get the existing year data out of our by year object. Now, if you're paying attention, and if you remember what we did from class, this is not going to exist. Right? The very first time through, think about the very first loop. Very first time this executes, we have a year 1909. So the by year is going to be empty. There is no 1909 in here. So the question becomes, what is year data at that point? And so we can just play down here in the console. So let's just run node. And let's just do let o equal an empty object. So we have some variable o. It's an empty object. And we say o, right? We'll just do the same thing. We have square brackets and some year. So let's do o, and let's feed in 2004 and hit enter. So it's undefined, right? So we will know if we've not done anything for a given year yet, if our fetch for the given year returns nothing, returns undefined. So we'll just do a check here really quick. So we'll say if year data triple equals undefined, we need to do something. And so that something's pretty easy. We just say year data, right? We're just replacing this variable that's currently undefined. We're just going to set it equal to an empty object. So now year data is some object. And this is really important. So right here, before we do anything else, we don't want to put the record back into by year, right? We want to put in that object. We want to put this year data object in. Right? So now we have by year, r.year, year data. Now I want to stop right here and fix something that we identified. This is still retained as an integer. Let's go ahead and change it to a string. So let's make a new variable. Let str year, let the string year equal string string. Is that the way we do it? You know, honestly, let me double check that because I may be telling you wrong. 2004 dot, is there a toString on there? There's not a toString. I saw that pop up in there and I was like, ooh, maybe I'm telling you the wrong way. Let's do string 2004. It's not defined. The simplest things in JavaScript throw me for a loop when I have not messed with it. The easiest way to do this, we can put that in a template literal. 2004. I'm sure I'm thinking about this the wrong way. Is there a parse string? There's not a parse string. I would actually go look on Stack Overflow at this point because I've been doing too much Python and I don't remember how we can convert that over. A string a capital S? It's a capital S string 2004. There it is. All right. Capital S string for our str year, turning our string year, r.year. And so now we have the year as a string. And we're going to use this for our keys. So I'm just going to copy this variable, paste that in by year, down here by year, right? So we have those as strings, year data, and we still have our console.log by year. So let's just drop out a node. And I hit Control D to do that. And we'll just run that file again. And so now we have all of our years, and they're empty. And that's okay. That gives us a start of how we want to structure our tree. So we now have all of this data available. We're going to group them by year. So each year is going to have a set of makes. So we will simply say year data. Now remember, we're iterating over each individual record already. So we can say year data r dot make. That's the make that we have, equal to an empty object. So again, we're just stubbing this in. We haven't done anything yet. Save this file, and then let's run it again. So now we see Rolls-Royce shows up in here. So these are 2013 and 2013. These are all the makes that we have data for. Nissan, Porsche, Rolls-Royce. Notice Rolls-Royce is in quotes here because it has a special character, has that hyphen in there. Scion, Subaru, but these are all strings as well. It just doesn't put them in quotes because they don't have any special characters that aren't valid for an identifier in JavaScript. And so each make then is going to have some models. So there's a pattern showing up. If I just go get whatever the current make is out of the year data, the last one is going to win, right? So if I say r dot make was to equal r dot model and save that, we're just going to have one model in each group, which that doesn't work, right? We need all of the models. And there's also another thing, we do have IDs in here as well. So we have each record has a unique identifier, numeric identifier. So we just want to repeat the same pattern that we've already done. So I'm just going to delete this line for a second. Or do I need to delete it? Let's not delete it. Let's get rid of the end of this. And let's just copy. Just like here, we say let year data equal by year. Once we have this year data in hand, right, or we've determined that it's a new empty object, we'll say let make data equal year data r make. Potentially, this will be undefined. But if we've already seen, say, Toyota for this year, and now we're on the second model, because we have each individual unique record, then the make data is going to be, it's already going to exist. It's already going to be populated in here. So let make data equal year data r make. And it's literally, we're doing this exact same check. Potentially make data is undefined. And in that case, we just want to make it a new object. And if it already exists, then this code won't run and we'll have the make data that already exists for the given year. So now make data r dot make. So the key that we're plugging in here, some make, is going to be equal to r dot id. So whatever that unique ID was for this record. And so now we have to put this make data into the year data. So we'll just come underneath that and we will say our year data. Oh, and I'm sorry, I did that the wrong way. I apologize. That's model. The model goes under the make. So our year data, r dot make. So we're saying 2019 Toyota, right? So try to keep track of that in your head, how we're building this. 2019 is the year data, right? We pulled the year out up here. Year data is what happens. It's the result of fetching a year out of our main by year data structure, right? So we have year data. So we've pulled out, we'll say 2019. And now we're attempting to pull out the make like Toyota. And then that is going to get set to our make data. So notice up here, let make data equal year data r.make. So from 2019, get Toyotas. Potentially that's undefined, so we'll just make it an empty object. Put the given model into that object, and that's the key, and the value is the ID of this record. Now, once we have that model saved in the make data, so we have Toyota, what's a Toyota? Toyota Corolla equals some record ID. We now have to attach that to the make. So we're saying of this 2019 data set, Toyota equals make data. So we just keep collecting those and rolling them back up. And so this year data then gets rolled back up into by year, string year. And so the pattern to this is each time we've accessed a piece of data, let year data equal by year, string year, we're doing the inverse when we're done. We're saying by year, string year equals year data. So we pull this data out, we have changed it in here, and so then we store it back in there. And so let's see if we save this. I don't see any syntax errors. And so we'll run this, and it logs a bunch of stuff out, and so we can just kind of spot check this data that it's logged out. In Volvo, we see multiple records in here, Volvo C30, Volvo C70, all the different IDs for those. Let's go up and see. So we have 2013 BMW. So in 2013, BMW had an X5 an X5M, an X6, an X6M. This data is probably not complete. That looks a little light for BMW, but for our purposes, this looks correct. The other spot check we're looking at, are there any IDs missing? And so they may not necessarily go in order because this isn't ordered once we get down to the leaf level. We can just kind of pop around and look. Here's 223 or 7223, 7224. And that all makes sense. That all looks good. So I don't think we've missed anything. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with our logic. Toyota Land Cruiser. So these are all records at the very end of that data set. So let's spot check it by just going back over to that raw data and look and see how many Toyotas we see listed down here at the end. So I see a 2013 Toyota Land Cruiser. 2013 make Toyota Venza. So we should see Land Cruiser and Venza under Toyota for 2013, which we do. Toyota Land Cruiser, Toyota Venza. So I'm going to say that our data is in good shape at this point. Our transform has worked successfully. And so remember what we were kind of demonstrating, how we access that. So let's just, the other spot check we want to do here is we'll say console.log by year 2013. And we did change that to a string, 2013. Then it's going to be Toyota Venza. And there'll be an ID associated with that. So I'm just going to save that. Linter, switch those over. And I'm just going to type in a clear here, and we'll run that same file again. And notice 7263. So we fetched the ID for 23 Toyotas, or 2013 Toyota Venza. So we can save this now by year. How many Toyotas were there? What models were there in 2013? There were 2, Land Cruiser Venza. So it gives us this nice format for accessing our data in a very direct way. So we've created, this is an index. We've created an index of our data. So we don't need this console log anymore. But what we do need is to hang on to this data, persist this data. So you could put this data in a database, and then you wouldn't necessarily do this work to transform the file. But we've done this data, or I'm sorry, we've done these transformations on this data here in JavaScript with JSON. And so let's just put some JSON back on disk with a file. And so the way we're going to do that, we are in Node.js, and Node.js has access to files. So we can do Node.js, write JSON to file. You can just Google for that and get the answer. We're going to work through the answer. So Node.js file system. We're going to write something to the file system. And so we can open file system documentation. We are using the LTS version, so we'll just switch our documentation to version 10. And then there are quite a few options in here, and you can look around and see what we want to do. But we want to write a file, and there's write file sync. So fs write file. I'm just going to open that in a new tab. Fs write file sync. The difference between these, I'm going to switch back and forth between these tabs. Fs write file sync. So file is a string, a buffer, a URL, or an integer. It's the file name or file descriptor. Data is a string, buffer, or typed array, or data view. So that's the data we want to write to our file. And then there are some options on the encoding down here that we can use, including how we open the file, what the flag is. So that just W means we're going to open the file for writing. W for write. Over here, fsWrite file has another one. It takes a callback. Notice that is not in a square bracket, so callback is not optional. So that's important to note here. This being in a square bracket, options are optional, and that remains the same here. Options are optional. And so fsWrite file by default is non-blocking. That's an asynchronous function. You will call write file. It will asynchronously write that file. So you have to provide a callback that gets executed when the file is finished being written. Write file synchronous, that sync on here, this will block. So this will sit there. Your code will not move past this line. until you are finished writing the file. That's what sync means. So we're going to use that. It makes it a lot easier to write code, these little utility functions. But note, when you do this, nothing else is happening inside your file until that operation completes. So it blocks the execution of all of your code until this is finished. So fs write file, we'll just copy this. We will go over here, and I'm going to make a new function, right? So we were talking about making composable code. Pull this down a little bit. And so right now, when I get the JSON back, I call make tree. I'm going to make a new function called write JSON file. And I'm just going to stub this in fs.write file sync. And we'll leave this right here for a second. I haven't hit save yet. Just like this, when we imported fetch at the top, we have to import fs before we can use it. So const fs equals require fs. The information for that should be right here at the top of the documentation. Let's jump up here. They should have a usage right here at the top. To use this module, const fs equals require fs, which is what we just plugged in. So const fs require fs, we've got this at the top. We will scroll back down. So write JSON file, fs, write file synchronous. File is going to be the name of the file we want to write. So this will be by year.json. Then the data that we want to write and the optional options. So the data that we want to write comes from calling this function right here. So let's grab make tree. We can say let data equal make tree, right? And make tree takes in this full data, which is going to keep the same name, write JSON file, full data. Let data equal make tree from the full data. So now, instead of calling make tree with the JSON, we're going to call write JSON file. So we've kind of moved things around a little bit. Now this data needs to be turned into JSON before we can write it. So we can compose this. We can put the function inside here where we want to put our writable data, but we can just go make another variable here. So we will say our JSON data equals JSON.stringify data. Right, so now we've turned our data into our JSON data, and we're ready to write that to disk. So write file synchronous, we can hover over that. You can see the write file synchronous takes a path, the data, and then any options. So the data here is going to be JSON data. This is what we've turned into a string, so we're writing that string to this file. And then we do want to specify that we are writing this in, or that we want to write the file in UTF-8. So we'll save that. And console.log data URL. We'll throw another console log down here. Console.log finished. Would help if I would put that as a string. So we can save that. Let's go back into terminal. I'm going to execute clear again. And so we'll run. And so it outputs the URL. It says finished. Notice the file changed over here. I have byyear.json, so we can open that. And I believe at this point, the tokenization skipped. I'm not sure. It's a big file. I don't know if we should try to make it pretty or not, but we can kind of spot check this, that it looks correct. There's 1909, Ford Model T, 1926, Chrysler Imperial, 1948, Citroen. So at a glance, this looks correct. We can try checking, validating here in a second in our next lesson. Well, let's make this buttoned up. Let's polish this a little bit. So console.log, we have unexpected console statement, no console. So I don't want you all putting console statements all throughout your code when you're done, when you finish developing things. So we're going to clean this up. We don't need that console log commented out anymore. we do want to come down and tell the user that you're doing something. And since we want this to be an appropriate output to the user, this is always going to run from somebody's computer. You're the user. You're going to run it on your computer. You do want some feedback that your code is actually functioning, but I don't want you to use console.log because those are going to sneak into production code, and that ultimately is a bad practice. We don't want to console.log everything on our front end. So it's better to leave the rule console.log is not allowed. What we can do, however, special variable we have access to here within Node is process, right? It's the Node.js process. Process has an attribute on it called std out. That means standard out. So that's the output to the console. And that has a method called write. So we can write data to the standard output. And so we can say that we are loading data from, and I'm going to change this to a template here real quick. So backticks, loading data from, dollar, curly braces, data URL. And then we're just going to put a \n over here on the end of this. That's a new line. So it's going to write this out and put a new line on the end. And now we can get rid of this console.log. We're going to copy this same statement. And instead of saying console.log finished, we're just going to standard out.write finished. And we'll throw an extra blank line on the end of there. So we'll put the /n on there. So now our linter is happy. And when we run our file, we can see that it says, oops, we're losing some of the output there. Stretch that up. Loading data from, and we have this whole URL. We can click on it, and then it says finished. So we have this output for the user. The other thing we might want to tell the user is, where are you actually putting this file? And so here, maybe beside full data, right in front of it, we'll say file name. And we'll get rid of byyear.json here, and we'll say file name. And now, when we write the JSON file, we will put in our file name, which we've not defined yet. And we'll say here, we'll let file name equal byyear.json. And we don't just want it here in the root of this. We want to be able to access this data as we're building our application. So we have some options. We could put it in the source directory here, or we could put it in the public directory here. Let's just put it in the public directory. It's a static file. So our file name is going to be equal to public/byyear.json. Now note, this is relative to where you execute the script from. So we are inside vehicle picker, so it will find public underneath vehicle picker when it creates this file. So let's do an ls here. We can see that we still have this byyear.json. Let's get rid of that. And so now let's run our utility file, loading data from, finished, right? This would be more useful. Instead of saying finished, we can say data written to, and let's change these to backticks so we can do a template literal. Data written to file name. And so now we can already look and see if this ran. We see byyear.json's already in here. So we're just going to run it again. And now we can see loaded data from, and the URL loaded from, data written to public/byyear.json. And so we can see that data is up here. So that's a great place to stop and commit our code. So we'll do get status because I have not committed anything so far. I'm going to make this terminal a little bigger. Let's clear this. So get status, untracked files, all of this is green. All of these little U's in here, untracked. And so we see / the current directory we are in is untracked. So we can just get add dot. And then we can also, let's jump up here. We did this in our other lesson, our get ignore at the very top. We will put in .vscode, and we will say a little comment, don't include VS Code workspace settings. And it's okay if you include it, but we generally don't want to include that. So now we see the get ignore is modified. The current directory we were in shows all these new files from our git add that we ran previously up here, and that VS Code file is ignored now. So we can do a git commit -am. So the -a is all the files. So we get all the ones we've already added, as well as this one that's modified down here without explicitly adding it. M for our commit message. And so we will add vehicle data app. And at that point, we can fire off our git push, and it will send that up to GitHub. We will pick up next with building some dynamic selects.